that this is done in a group or done conscious of a group sharing these practices? No. Okay.
No, the individual contemplation is done as an individual. When the group comes together then and shares the fruits of their individual contemplation, we engage in, I guess, what you would call a group discernment process. We try to discern as a group what that is saying to us, whether it is calling us to some kind of action or whatever. So it's an attempt to apply the exercise of discernment to the experiences of the individuals in the group.
I'm interested in the, I'm an English professor. I love terminology, and I spend time thinking about the registers of different terms. We've had, just in the last set of comments, theory, collective, contemplative, and discernment. I'm thinking about discernment in relation to things like theory or analysis. Are these the same? Are they related to one another? Are they quite distinct?
Does anybody want to try a reply to that?
Since I raised the term, perhaps I should clarify what I mean by discernment as opposed to theory or intellectual or rational analysis. I use the term discernment in a fairly rigid way, and what I mean by it is it assumes that when an individual enters into the practice of contemplation, there will be different movements created within that person. He will experience something. It may not be a thought, a precise, specific thought or idea. It may just be a movement of turmoil, of peace, or whatever. But discernment assumes that those movements that arise out of this exercise of contemplation are subject to a process of evaluation, I guess you would say, of weighing them, weighing their significance, weighing them by their fruits, where they are leading a person, whether they are leading in a specific direction of a type of action that is to be taken. So to me it is a different process than rational analysis, and it is certainly a lot different from theory because it is always based on concrete experience of the individual in contemplation. Is
That's helpful.
making it any clearer at all, or am I just muddying things up?
No, I think that's, you are clarifying your use of the term. I'm interested that happens for the group you describe in a collective, that people discern together. Then it suggests to me that those movements, the emotional, reason movements, instinctual movements, however you would describe them, are something that aren't retained for the individual just by him or herself, but are something that are discerned collectively. Yes?
Does anybody else want to chime in on this theme? Yes.
I want to say something about defamiliarizing, and I think some aspects of it have been talked about on a more negative scale, but I want to say that deep joy
Thank you.
defamiliarizes, and partly what I mean by that is the deep joy of doing something you really, really want to do, which to me moves into the whole area of eros, and I'm not talking here about generalized eros, I'm talking about something that's profoundly satisfying, but it'll shake you up. For example, I'm a bilingual Albertan, and I have just in the last 5 years begun to write in my mother tongue, which I didn't do before because I work in an Anglophone world, and it is profoundly it's a huge shake-up for me. I literally shake after a bout of writing, but it's also a deep joy.
This is strikes me as a really important comment, and you're so right to say we tend to think, well, what stimulates these moments of deep kind of when the familiar is jarred and we stand back and look at it, that would be crisis. Crisis would be negative. But why should it be? Why shouldn't it be joy or excitement or realization? Seeing the potential for something you thought was only held by yourself, and whether we call those moments of discernment or theory, seeing where it can go, seeing that there is a collective to work with. I mean, even the sense of writing, I mean, this is back to the paradox I was talking about in reading. That can seem like a very individual activity to sit down to write. But what are you doing? You're trying to express it beyond yourself, beyond the self, to a collective, an audience, to others, to connect rather than to isolate. More on this topic or a new topic?
Somebody.
Yeah, I was, this is not quite formulated in my head just yet, but I'm picking up on what you said about self versus other and the whole notion of activism. And it occurred to me that we do activism all the time. For example, parenting. For example, mothering. In other words, any time that we're not self-involved or doing something quote-unquote selfish, in a way we are being active. So the question to me is, where do you draw the circle? Is it your nuclear family, and that's not activism, your extended family, etc.? Also, I realized little philanthropic things. Like before Christmas, I get 25 to 30 requests for dough. Everything from MS to the art gallery, Salvation Army, no less than 25. So when I go through and give, a little bit here, a little bit there, is that activism? I would argue it is. So I'm trying to get this to a very pragmatic level, rather than get all this meta talk, which I love, but I'm trying to understand it. You see, I was thinking before, when I was back in New York and I didn't go to the South, I didn't make the time to go to the South, I was giving ladies seats in the subway. I was doing other activism kind of things on the micro level. And is that activism? And when you do it right, it comes from, I hate the word it comes from work on the self. And then you're less selfish, really. So I just want to bring it down to that level and see if it helps us at all.
Just quickly, your comment, which I welcome very much, suggests that there's kind of romanticized versions of the contemplative on this side and romanticized versions of the activist on that side, right? And these can be connected to images of the grand act or the grand meditation, I guess, and these become sort of iconic in our minds and therefore cause us to devalue the daily moments of silence or moments of engagement. One of the things that I hope there are etymologists in the room. When did activism become a term as compared to activity or activeness? This is something I don't know. Does anybody know the history of the term activism as this kind of politicized, engaged idea?
Somebody can check the online OED.
Yeah, has anybody got their site up? Quickly check that.
My guess is it came from feminism. It started all the isms.
No, we had Catholicism long before that.
Yeah, that's right. I think there were a few isms long before.
I'd just like to touch on a couple points. One was defamiliarization. I had the opportunity to live 6 years with the Inuit way up north, and I was one of a handful of so-called white people, I guess you could call them. And it was a good opportunity to exit like colonialism kind of type thinking, in the sense that you can see other people's priorities and the differences that they have and what they think is important, as opposed to, I guess, for the South. So, in my, that was not all of it, but part of a way to defamiliarize yourself is to travel and see different cultures and to step back and evaluate one's own. That's one point. The other one was to touch base with a fellow who's in the back there, just talking about, are we always active? Like, I'm sitting in this chair right now. Am I active or am I not? And ought I be here? I think the contemplative side that one gets by sitting here, or by opening up maybe Plato's Republic, or some existentialist work, I think that in philosophy is good to challenge one's thinking and so on. I think that's the contemplative side, at least that's the way I view it, into thinking, well, this is how I act in my day-to-day work. I get up, I feed the kids, I do the laundry, I go to my job, and yada yada yada. But the thing is, ought I do something over and beyond that? Is that sufficient? Raising my children in a certain manner, is that, if I just feed them, is that enough? Or what ought I do, I think is the question. I think that's where the contemplative side comes in, and we start thinking of ought as opposed to is.
There's a couple of things that occurred to me. One, thank you for the comment about the stepping out of the familiar. I mean, that's what defamiliarize means. That could be a cultural zone, that could be a geography, that could be so many kinds of things that just let you know that the thing you assumed as normal and standard and regular isn't. Lots of people don't live there. And that's a very healthy experience to have, right? This is, I think, the generation of justice movements, all kinds of very important elements. The second thing that occurs to me in talking about the more meditative, contemplative element of I'm feeding the kids, I'm doing the daily job, is that this is about, in some ways, for me anyway, about the presence a person brings to those activities. You can do the same activities and kill the life that you're engaging with, and you can do the same activity and enhance that life and feed it, right? And they can be the same view from the outside. They can look like the same activity. Maybe that's why there's a desire for a kind of a spiritual language for this kind of presence, because it is about the kind of engagement, whether it's feeding somebody or going to work, what kind of responsiveness and willingness to be open to the other, and the kind of defamiliarizing of one's own experience in that in daily relationships. There was a comment. I see one down here from somebody we haven't heard from before.
I would say for myself, and probably most are here from the contemplative aspect, and from a retirement point of view, I think that contemplative probably more today than ever. However, from an active point of view, I don't have to plan like I had to all the time before, and I find the need to use Covey's effectiveness type of principles to lay things out daily, so I will take this spiritual contemplative thing and plan so that there will be more activism.
So that's kind of like about intention and organizing one's energy so that it's directed and not just static.
I've had a number of thoughts flying through my head, but in response to the fellow in the back about whether, giving that $20 or whatever, I remember being in a conversation and we were debating whether giving